Hello and welcome. This is Spotlight Africa, brought to you by Spectrum Television and Planet Radio. My name is Uyai Anyeka. Good evening and thanks for joining us. On the headlines on Spotlight Africa today, we see the fact that Liberian polls have opened and football legend George Weah eyes second presidential term. Gabon coup leader appoints new parliament. Cameroon flawed death toll rises to 27. World Bank and IMF focus on African prosperity at annual converge. Plus, French army begins withdrawal from Niger Republic. The stories are all ahead on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. First in Spotlight Africa, Liberians began voting today, Tuesday, the 10th of October, an hour before polling got underway at 8 a.m. GMT. Hundreds of people were already waiting to cast their ballots at voting stations, mostly set up in schools in the capital, Monrovia. A move considered by most on whether to give football legend George Weah a second term as president, with peace among voters main concerns in a nation still scarred by back-to-back civil wars. The main political parties have pledged that the presidential and legislative elections in the West African country will pass off peacefully. Healthcare, education and roads, jobs and the cost of living all make up the strong needs of the Liberian nation. But the recent killing of 3 people in clashes between their supporters has fueled fears of a return to violence. Trouble also marked the close of Weah's re-election campaign on Sunday, with his supporters and opposition members throwing stones at each other, and at least 5 persons seriously injured and police intervening with tear gas. Between 1989 and 2003, the conflict in Liberia has left more than 250,000 people dead. Incumbent George Weah, 57, the first African to win football's most prestigious individual award, the Ballon d'Or, in 1995, faces 19 presidential candidates and a likely second-round runoff in early November. The former international football star George Weah came to power promising to create jobs and invest in education, with critics saying he has failed to keep his pledges. But he has campaigned on the slogan "one round victory," encouraging Liberians to cherish the peace enjoyed in the country and continue to preserve it, stating that without peace, the world will be difficult. Weah told thousands of people gathered in Monrovia on Sunday. Without peace, development will not take place, he had stated. The National Electoral Commission is seeking to reassure people it can organize fair and credible polls. Everything is ready, and they anticipate that all should go well, the commissioner chairperson Davideta Brown had said to Liberians. The election is the first to be held since the United Nations ended its peacekeeping mission in Liberia in 2018. The European Union, the African Union, the West African Bloc ECOWAS, and the United States have deployed observers in a region hit by a string of recent coups. We also see the fact still in Liberia. West African Elders Forum, WAEF election mission to Liberia, has advised political actors and other stakeholders in today's polls to shun violence and commit to peaceful elections. The head of the WAEF mission and former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, and deputy head of mission, Kadri Oldego, who is a former prime minister of Burkina Faso, in a statement enjoined candidates to abide by the peace accord, urging the National Electoral Commission, NEC, and the security agencies to exercise their mandate in accordance with the nation's laws to build trust and guarantee the integrity of the polls. Meanwhile, President George Weah, who is going for re-election, is being challenged by opposition coalitions, and no fewer than 2.3 million voters are registered to participate in the voting. In another development, Gabon's coup leader General Brice Oligui Nguema on Saturday appointed members of a new National Assembly and Senate for a transitional period ahead of promised elections on an unknown date. Military and police chiefs joined forces on August 30 to carry out a bloodless coup widely backed by politicians, civil society and the public in general after more than 55 years of the Bongo family in rule. The new regime has pledged to hold free elections and hand power back to civilians at the date due to be agreed at a national dialogue. The military said it hopes elections will take place between April and June of 2024 in the name of the transitional head of state, a regime spokesman read out on national television. The 98 names of new parliament members, including opposition party figures and some who supported ousted President Ali Bongo Ondimba. The military had already set up a civilian government for the transition period led by Raymond Ndong Sima as Prime Minister, who had previously served as Prime Minister before becoming a leading opposition politician under Bongo. The government has to work with a National Transition Council made up of army officers who have the same portfolios as ministers. Still on news coming out of Africa, the death toll in Cameroon flood has risen to 27, with more than 50 injured as rescuers intensify the search for those missing following the deluge of the previous day. Recall that the rains unleashed flood waters in the district of Yaoundé 2 of the country's capital on Sunday, sweeping away buildings and reducing many to rubble. One of the victims mentioned that some bodies have traveled a long way and have been found more than 100 meters from their homes. Speaking with newsmen, Urbanism Minister Celestine Curtis, who visited the site, also called on local residents to follow the instructions of local authorities because the country has so many documents concerning the well and planned evacuation of the city. In another development, a popular social media influencer in Angola, Ana da Silva Miguel, known as Neth Nahara, has seen her prison sentence increased to 2 years for insulting President João Lourenço on TikTok. Initially, the sentence was for 6 months. In August, an appeals court decided the initial sentence was too lenient and raised it to 2 years. Ms. Miguel accused the president on her TikTok account of anarchy and disorganization and blamed him for issues like the lack of schools, housing and employment in the country. President Lourenço was re-elected for a second term last August, continuing the MPLA party's long-standing rule. The party has been in power since Angola's independence in 1975 and has faced accusations of leading a repressive regime. The appeal court in the capital, Luanda, cited Ms. Miguel's offensive words against the president and her significant influence on public opinion as reasons for the harsher sentence. Despite her plea for leniency as a first-time offender and mother of young children who regretted her remarks, the court dismissed her request and ordered her to pay President Lourenço $1,200, approximate of £1,000, for damage to his reputation. Ms. Miguel, with over 230,000 TikTok followers and thousands of views on her videos, is the first person in Angola to be convicted for content posted on TikTok, according to her lawyer. The ruling is final as appeals to the Supreme Court are only permitted for sentences exceeding 3 years. We'll take a quick break here now. When we return, we'll bring you the rest of the stories on Spotlight Africa. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned, and now to the rest of the stories around the continent of Africa. In Ethiopia, about 3% of high school students pass the university entrance examinations. The Education Minister has announced a score similar to that of last year, of about 845,188 students who took part in the entrance exam. Only 27,000 obtained the average required to be admitted to university, explained by Bahanu Nega, quoted by the National News. This means that only 3.2% passed the examination, a drop of about 0.01 percentage points compared to the previous school year. He continued that almost half of the schools that presented candidates, not a single student, passed the exam. Now, according to Dr. Meseret Asefa, a lecturer at the Faculty of Education and Behavioral Sciences at Addis Ababa University, this low score was due in particular to a lack of teaching tools and poor learning and teaching methods. He welcomed recent efforts to reduce cheating in examinations, but there is a lack of interest in tackling the real teaching and learning problems that affect student performance. According to UNICEF, Ethiopia has made enormous progress towards universal primary education in recent years, with 88.7% of the country's children enrolled in primary school by 2021-2022. However, only 33.1% of the age group is enrolled in secondary education, according to the United Nations Children's Agency. In Ethiopia, the quality of learning is a major challenge, with 90% of 10-year-olds unable to read or understand a sentence from a simple text. Only 10% of the age group was in higher education in Ethiopia in 2018, according to the World Bank. We move now to Algeria, where we see the announcement of a suspension in mediation in Niger, intended to put an end to the crisis that has shaken Niger since the takeover by the military. The Algerian government has decided to postpone the initiation of the planned preparatory discussions until obtaining the clarifications that it considers necessary regarding the implementation of Algerian mediation in Niger, indicated by the Ministry of Affairs Foreigners in a press release. Algiers recalls that the Nigerian authorities had informed the Algerian government on September 27 by official letter of their acceptance of Algerian mediation in the political, institutional and constitutional crisis that Niger is facing. The Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune then instructed the head of diplomacy Ahmed Attaf to go to Niamey as soon as possible to begin preparatory discussions. But the exchanges between the two chancelleries on the program and content of these visits were not conclusive. The press release also showed that Algeria deplores the official and public declarations from Nigerian authorities to raise legitimate questions as to their real willingness to follow up on their acceptance of Algerian mediation. The Prime Minister of Niger, Ali Mohamed Lamine Zien, declared that he had learned of the acceptance of this mediation on social networks, half-heartedly accusing Algeria of manipulation. Algiers had proposed at the end of August political discussions for a maximum of 6 months, with participation and approval of all parties in Niger without exclusion, under the supervision of a civil authority led by a consensual personality and accepted by all sides of the political class, in order to lead to the re-establishment of constitutional order in the country. Niger has been governed for more than 2 months by a military regime that came to power after a coup that overthrew elected President Mohamed Bazoum. In another development, operations in the Republic of Niger should begin this Tuesday, as we see French recalling out their troops under the escort of the Nigerian army, announcing the military regime which came to power through a coup d'etat at a time when Algeria decided to suspend his mediation supposed to find a way out of the crisis. Now, operations for the departure of the first convoy under the escort of the Defense and Security Forces will begin today, October the 10th, the military regime said. The withdrawal of some 1,400 French soldiers from the country was demanded by the Nigerian generals quickly after they came to power at the end of July, and French President Emmanuel Macron announced their departure at the end of September. After meetings and exchanges between the authorities and the French sides, a timetable for the withdrawal of their troops was determined by mutual agreements specified by the regime. This weekend, several convoys took place between the advanced bases in the northwest, where about 400 soldiers are deployed, and the capital Niamey, according to Nigerian and French security sources. At least 2 convoys had allowed the bases of Olam and Tarbe Bere to be supplied, and several French soldiers were considered as priorities to be transported to Niamey. The resupply made it possible to improve the situation of the French soldiers on site, the reserves of rations, water and fuel, and therefore the electricity produced from generators could be counted in days. Thanks for staying tuned to conclude the stories on Spotlight Africa. At the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank being held this week in Marrakesh, Morocco, the 2 institutions have said they want to focus on African prosperity. A prosperous 21st century is only possible with a prosperous Africa, Kristalina Georgieva, the managing director of the IMF, had stated. The world's most powerful economic policymakers are meeting in Africa for the first time in 50 years to discuss the growth and stability of the global economy at a time of war, inequality and climate change. In data published today, the IMF said it has maintained its growth forecast at 3% for the world economy in 2023, despite signs of weakness in several of the major economies. It expects growth to be only slightly weaker in 2024 at about 2.9%, down slightly, minus 0.1 percentage points on its previous estimate published in July. Often lenders of last resort, the IMF and the World Bank use billions in loans and assistance to buoy struggling economies and encourage countries operating in deficit to implement reforms they say promote stability and growth. But critics, including officials from throughout Africa, have said policies that deny economies access to credit and loans in the absence of balanced budget often require governments to make impossible choices. Today on Spotlight Africa, we see the fact that Gates Foundation has pledged $40 million to help develop COVID-19 vaccines in Africa. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has pledged a $40 million investment to assist multiple African manufacturers in producing messenger RNA vaccines on the continent. Institute Pasteur and South Africa's BioVac will utilize an mRNA research and manufacturing platform developed by Quantum Biosciences in Belgium. Both vaccine manufacturers will receive $5 million in funding from the foundation, with an additional $10 million allocated for unnamed companies. The remaining $20 million will support Quantum in advancing the technology and reducing cost. Messenger RNA vaccine technology gained prominence with the development of COVID-19 vaccines by companies like Pfizer and Moderna. And this is all we have for you today on Spotlight Africa. Thank you for being a part of this. Spotlight Africa brings you news all around the continent, brought to you by Spectrum Television and Planet Radio. My name is Uyai Anek, and thanks for being a part of this, and to enjoy the rest of your evening.